Hello, it's Cannabis Industry Lawyer explaining the marijuana laws so that you can change them. Today is a very special episode of the Cannabis Industry Lawyer. We are going to be talking all about IRC 280E. IRC, of course, stands for the Internal Revenue Code. Now, maybe you didn't know this, but you're going to learn it. And you're going to want to stick around until the end of this because that's when we're going to tell you an interesting thing that might be worth billions of dollars, and hopefully you'll tell other people. And also, we've got a new website. We'll tell you it then. So, back in 1981, this Coke dealer, who had a great lawyer, by the way, tried to deduct the cost of carrying on his cocaine operations, and he was successful. Congress got up in arms because it was 1981, so the Just Say No campaign was just going to start getting going. Congress passed this particular section of the tax code that says it is prohibited. If you are trafficking in a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 substance under the Controlled Substances Act, you are prohibited from deducting the cost of carrying on your business. This is different than what they call costs of goods sold, aka COGS, C-O-G-S, in tax lingo. So no longer could these cocaine dealers deduct the cost of carrying on their operations, but they still could deduct the cost of goods sold because Congress didn't want a constitutional challenge down the road that was not possible. Let's do 2 seconds on the difference between carrying on your business and the cost of goods sold. It's really flippin' easy. The cost of goods sold would be to manufacture your widget, or in this case, let's call it cannabis. So cannabis is the good. The cost of the manufacture of that cannabis, and in theory that would go to all of its levels. So it's not just the flower that you would have to grow, dry, process, manicure, age, and package. Packaging is interesting. Is that on the cusp of carrying on your business, or is that the cost of the good? I think everybody can agree that creating like a distillate or brownies or something, some type of edible, those would be costs of goods sold. That's what you're actually selling. However, when does that become carrying on your business? Like you've now manicured the gram of flour really, really well, and you put it into whatever your receptacle is that you were going to sell it into. Is that still cost of goods sold? Or let's go one step after that. You've already put it into its inventory, so you can now place it in inventory, but you are the cultivation center and you are making the transition. You are driving to the dispensary. Are we still on cost of goods sold? You see, it gets really, really into the weeds on that. Now, when you get into carrying on your business, your trafficking business, that would be if you have rent, phone, employees, what are the other common expenses? Advertising, let's say. Did you hear that new weed advertisement? Oh yes, that's costs of carrying on your trafficking business. Those are all going to be hit by IRC 280E. Those types of expenses, some of the ways that they are currently fighting them, well, they aren't fighting them. They're trying to avoid them. In tax, a lot of times you try to avoid the tax, and the way they are avoiding the tax is, let's say that you rent 1,000 square feet for we're not going to call it a dispensary, we're going to call it a tea house. And at that tea house, you have a lot of educational materials about cannabis, but in a closet, it's only about 200 square feet of the 1,000 square feet, you can go into and buy your cannabis. If you've ever been to a dispensary and you've seen that there's a waiting area and then there's a back area where you can go into to buy cannabis, they've measured that square footage of that area because that's what's going to get hit by the IRC 280E. And you have your cannabis and you leave that area and there's some merch, let's say, and then there's a place where you can maybe buy a cup of tea and hang out and talk with some other people. All that area, those square foot for the rent, would not be needed for carrying on your trafficking business. That's one of the reasons why they put those types of bifurcations in there, because those companies are doing tax avoidance planning. Often they will also have sub LLCs inside of each other, which, because cannabis is such a highly regulated industry, doesn't necessarily work all the time, because somebody has to have that cannabis license that gives that business the right to sell that type of cannabis. It's more difficult than to have like a sub LLC in it, but you can work the dispensary that you have a certain way to minimize and avoid your double taxation due to IRC 280E. Before we get to the real interesting question about IRC 280E and the federal budget, if you're enjoying this content and you want to help the Cannabis Industry Lawyer, give us a thumbs up, click subscribe. If you're really nuts, you can click that little bell, and then you'll have a whole new push notification for every time we publish one of these videos that you can either go like, oh cool, or oh god, and then you just click. I mean, I have like so many of them, and I love you too, but it's just like, here's another one. I should not have clicked the bell. I'm basically talking you out of clicking the bell. Okay, click it. Let's now talk about why we're really here. In 2015, Congress defunded the Department of Justice from enforcing the Controlled Substances Act as to medical marijuana. Currently, I believe I would need to check the budget to see if it's still Section 542. It was Section 542. It then listed 44 states and other territories of the United States that have medical marijuana, and expressly defunds Jefferson Beauregard Session III and his little elf cronies from doing anything to stand in the way of medical marijuana. However, we're going to get into some hyper-technical readings of the law. IRC 280E says, is prohibited by federal law. So what does is prohibited mean? Is prohibited is a verb to enforce something that the Controlled Substances Act says is unlawful. The Controlled Substances Act does not say marijuana is prohibited. It says it is unlawful to have marijuana. The prohibition is a verb. The unlawfulness, that is the character of the marijuana. Now we need Jefferson Beauregard Session III and his little elf-like cronies to stop and prosecute and that's why you point. When you're stopping and you're prosecuting, you point. When you're not doing that, you're doing this. And so to prosecute the cannabis businesses that are selling medical marijuana, but he cannot do it. Therefore, for those taxable years that have arisen since Section 542 of the budget, since 2015, and it grows as more medical marijuana states come on board, there are additional states added to this protection. Doesn't that mean that this unlawful characteristic of this plant is not prohibited, but it is actually permissible? It is, if anything is prohibited, and there's a case from 2016 called the McIntosh case from the Ninth Circuit, where they threw out a lot of prosecutions against cannabis businesses in California. The Ninth Circuit is on the West Coast. Yeah, the Ninth Circuit is on the West Coast. I'm in the Seventh Circuit, Illinois. So that means that the prohibition isn't there. If something's unlawful, but it's illegal, I mean, it's not illegal, there's no money, there's no enforceability of that unlawful character, how is it prohibited? And therefore, haven't all these taxes collected by medical marijuana companies since the since the defunding of Jeff Sessions and even before him, haven't all those collections made by the IRS been ill-gotten, because IRC 280E should not apply, as it is not prohibited, it is just unlawful. That's what I would argue. And if, do you know how to make a request for tax overpayment? It sucks. Like, you still have to get hit by the IRC 280E. And then if you think that you should not have been, you have to make a demand on the IRS, be like, I've overpaid, this tax should not have applied. You have to sue them, and then you already know they got the money. So there's billions of dollars out there, probably mostly paid in cash, and I don't think they should have been paid because IRC 280E only applies to trafficking in a controlled substance which is prohibited, like a cocaine dealer. A medical marijuana business is not only not prohibited, it is permitted by a congressional action that stops the enforcement body, Jeff Sessions, and the Department of Justice from actually doing anything. So I think that you have a good argument for overpayment of taxes. And if you want to know more about that, check out our new website, CannabisIndustryLawyer.com. If you have any questions about the cannabis industry, we got a lot of new stuff coming up here in the future, by the way. We have our first series that we're going to be doing in the coming weeks and months. Ask the questions in the comments or go and visit us at CannabisIndustryLawyer.com and ask questions there, especially in regards to IRC 280E and whether your medical marijuana business has been hit by it since 2015, which all of them have. And if you should start an exploratory committee for a class action lawsuit of all the medical marijuana businesses that have overpaid on their taxes because what they are doing is permitted. It may be an unlawful transaction, but it is a permitted transaction for that tax year, and in tax law they have this thing called substance over form. So the characterization of the Controlled Substances Act and the defunding of Jeff Sessions by the section of the budget creates a tax year in which those transactions were permitted as opposed to prohibited, but they were still unlawful. That's me, Tom Howard, Cannabis Industry Lawyer. I'll see you real soon. If you have any questions at all about the cannabis industry, well, you should probably ask me. I mean, you can ask anybody, but you ask me, you're going to get a real answer. So I'll talk to you soon.